everybody. On behalf of the Highland Park Public Library, we'd like to welcome you to Library in Your Living Room. We are pleased to present Shelf Isolation, a weekly mini-series about books, culture, and what to read next. I'm Sarah, and this is your Information and Reader Services Department. In this episode, we are excited to share with you what we've been reading, watching, and or listening to during self-isolation. To begin our mini-series, I'm going to pass things over to Readers Roundtable expert and moderator, Michelle.
Thanks, Sarah. So this week I revisited a childhood favorite, which is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which, of course, as you know, is about a 10-year-old girl named Mary Lennox. Mary Lennox was a very unloved and neglected little girl. She's 10 years old. She was born in India to her very wealthy British parents, but they really didn't care for her very much, so she lived a very lonely life until her parents sadly passed away, and then she was taken in by her wealthy uncle who lived in a very isolated manner in the Yorkshire moors. Her uncle traveled a lot, so she also had a very lonely existence where she was kind of on her own for the very first time. She really didn't know how to take care of herself. She always had other people there to trust her and take care of her and watch after her. So she had to learn how to take care of herself. And then one day she was looking around the ground and she found a secret garden. And of course, after that, The Secret Garden changed everybody, and it was happily ever after. It's one of my favorite books, which means, of course, I also had to watch my favorite version of the movie, which is the 1993, which is the best one. I've seen it many, many times over many, many years, and it's still just a really wonderful version of the film. It's still one of my favorites. And actually, that's all I have to talk about today. So I'm going to pass on to Jacki.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Yeah, I love The Secret Garden too. It's one of those good ones. So one of the books I read this week is a series of essays called My Life as a Villainess by Laura Lippman. Laura Lippman is a crime writer who's written the Tess Monacan, that series, and some standalones. As a matter of fact, in one of our earlier self-isolation episode, I talked about her book, The Lady of the Lake. It's a really cool series of essays. She does not usually write in the first person, and it is her first nonfiction book. It has 15 essays in it that she talked about motherhood, her family life, her writing career. The last essay is about The Wire. And she happens to be married to David Simon, who was the creator and executive producer of The Wire. And so kind of get some background on that particular series. So it's a really very cool series of essays. So I will highly recommend it because she tries to be a villainess, but she's really too much of a nice woman to do that. The second book I read is a book by Sandra Brown called Thick of Thieves. And this is a really interesting book. Sandra Brown writes romantic thrillers, and this book takes place in the year 2000 and then like 20 years later in 2020. In 2000, the Saturday evening of Easter weekend, 4 people stole $500,000 from a department store in the small town of Caddo Lake, Texas. So you meet these 4 characters who have decided that they're not going to talk to each other, they're not going to do anything, they're going to just hide the money for 6 months and then divide it up. But by Sunday morning, Easter Sunday, one of those people are dead, one is in jail, one is in the hospital, and the 4th one is missing with the cash. And that happens to be Joe Maxwell. Joe had some really hard times recently. His wife was killed in a car accident, and he became an alcoholic. And he's trying to raise his 2 daughters, Lisa, who was 20, and Arden, who was 10. So 20 years later, Arden has come back to the town, moved into their historic home, which she and her sister had not sold. She is sort of trying to figure out what had happened, but only because of other circumstances that were going on. She hired a man named Burnett to refurbish the house, and he's the one who was in jail. And then there's somebody who's driving by her house at night, and she's not exactly sure who that is, and it turns out to be Rusty, who was the one who planned the heist His father at the time was the sheriff, and he is now the DA. So it's a really interesting book, and I love Sandra Brown's romantic thrillers because there's always a really good story, and then there's always a really sweet romance in it. And the last book I read is by Jill Shalvis called Almost Just Friends. And this takes place in Yellowstone, California, which one of the other books that I talked about earlier in our shelf isolation also takes place. And this is about a family. Jill Shalvis writes some really good family sort of coming together as adult type situation. And it's about Piper, who is an EMT. The book starts on her 30th birthday, and she is a list keeper. She writes lists for everything, carries her journal with her around so that she can keep track of what's going on. Well, she wants to sell their homestead that was their grandparents' house so that she can give the money to her brother Gavin and her sister Winnie so that they could continue on with their lives. They had a really hard life because when they were 13, they were sent home from overseas. Their parents were missionaries, and they ended up dying. So Piper has felt like she's needed to raise her brother and sister. Gavin was 10 at the time, and Gavin has had an addiction problem. He went to rehab and lost his job 6 months before, and he has not told Piper this because he doesn't want to upset her. He wants to try to solve this on his own. But he wants to take that homestead and turn it into a bed and breakfast. Winnie, who's now 20, she was 3 when their parents passed away, dropped out of college. She's pregnant, and she wants to also work at bed and breakfast with Gavin. Had not told Piper this. Winnie's baby daddy, if you want to call him that, is a man named Rowan, who actually grew up next door to them. They were best friends for their entire life, and they discovered that they were in love. But Rowan was killed in a car accident right after she found out she was pregnant. So Rowan's dad, Emmett, is having a lot of trouble with this, and Piper looks after him because he has diabetes. And then his oldest son, Cam, has come to help him. He's taken a short-term leave of absence from his job as the drug enforcement agency. So he has come to help Emmett, but they all needed to be able to heal in their own way because Piper and her brother and sister are still traumatized by their parents passing. Emmett and Cam are traumatized by Emmett's divorce from Cam's mother and the fact that he stayed with mom while Rowan came with dad. So it's an all-around healing type stuff. But there's also the nice romance between Piper and Cam. So I think you'll enjoy it. Like I said, she creates a really nice family healing type book for most of her books. And the only other thing I will mention, and last week I talked about Lake County voter power. Voter registration ends on October 6th, even though there's a kind of grace period after that you can register to vote. And the early voting site in Highland Park has changed from the police station to the Highland Park Country Club, Park Avenue West. And that early voting will start on October 19th. And they will also have a secure drop box if you want to drop your absentee ballot off there. So that's pretty much what I have for this week. And I'm going to turn it over to Catherine.
Thank you, Jackie. The first book I'm going to talk about is called Why We Swim by Bonnie Tsui, Tsui. Did you know that swimming is the second most popular recreational activity in the United States after walking? Well, you will know that after you read this book. Tsui answers why we swim in 6 sections: survival, well-being, community, competition, and flow. And her book is kind of like reading Bill Bryson. She sort of uses each topic as sort of a jumping off point to go into all sorts of interesting things, and she visits interesting people all over the world who have swum to save their lives for long distances. There are people who practice samurai martial arts that involve swimming, which is really cool. Imagine like being able to fight a sword fight while swimming. And I really like this book. It's relaxing, it's educational in an easy reading sort of way. Even if you're not a swimmer, this book is worth reading. And then the other book that I'm reading and have not finished yet is educational in more of an eyebrow-raising way. It's called Secret Historian: The Life and Times of Samuel Steward, Professor, Tattoo Artist, and Sexual Renegade. So Samuel Steward is not a well-known person. He, was never really very famous, but he had a very interesting life. He lived most of his adult life in Chicago, or at least much of it, and he taught at Loyola in DePaul. So Steward was born in 1919, and he knew from boyhood that he was gay. He did not shy away from that knowledge, and he grew up to be sort of a sexual explorer. And he took meticulous notes about his very numerous sexual encounters, and he was a consultant to Alfred Kinsey. He had sexual encounters with several famous people, including, if he's to be believed, Rudolph Valentino. He was friends and correspondent with many writers, including Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Toklas. And then in another chapter of his life, he became a tattoo artist, and he had a tattoo studio on South State Street. And he was a mentor to Ed Hardy. So that's about as far as I have gotten in the book. I think I'm about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through. It's a really interesting book. I have to say, the main focus of his adult life was his sex life. And so at times in the middle, I just thought, how many more sexual encounters can I hear about? The tone of the book is historical, not salacious, but after a while, I kind of ceased to be odd and kind of thought, well, maybe we can move on to a new chapter of his life now. But still, he really was a pretty amazing person. If you're interested in Chicago history, it's a really interesting chapter of that. And I really have been enjoying it as reading about 20th century gay life in a way that's not the stereotypical idea of being closeted and conflicted, but someone who really was pushing the envelope as far as he could and exploring gay life as much as he possibly could. So he really was an interesting character. And from there, I will go to Nancy.
Very interesting. Good to hear. Two very good stories. Swimming, one of my favorite things to do, myself, and a different life and someone who embraced themselves. That's cool. So in the archives in the library, we frequently get questions about people's homes, whether it's because a famous person lived there or someone lived there wants to know who lived here before me, who built this house. So we do have a fair number of resources. I'm going to share the screen, and as researching your house is rarely a one-stop shop, but we do have quite a lot in this library that we can help you with. Here's a list. It's on our website, and you may want to do that first before you come in. You come in and we can help you. When someone comes in and approaches me about their home, the first thing I want to know is, what are you looking for? Because you may want to know everything about your house. You may want to know who lived there, who built it. Do we have the drawings? We do have some drawings. We have other things. We do, of course, have our archives catalog online. And yesterday, someone who just bought this home came in and asked me about it, and they said, do you have pictures of my home? And I said, well, yes, indeed, because there was a teacher in Highland Park, Mr. Jesse Smith, who took pictures of homes and to teach architecture to the students. So we have a lovely glass slide of your house, plus more information. So we do have pictures. We don't have pictures of all houses. We have some architecture drawings, not a lot, but we can help you find them if they exist and help you get to the right source. And I also frequently use Google Books and Chicago Tribune to do searches and our own digitized Highland Park news. But one thing we haven't, that is not digitized, but we digitize piecemeal for people. We have realtors records that have been donated, and we can sometimes they tell you about your house. This is all 3 different sales for one home that I helped with people that were living there. And you might notice also the house numbers in Highland Park changed in 1950. In some cases, they changed more than once. So one of the first things when we're going to do, if you want to reach your home, is get you that first number. Those numbers are online on History Pin, and a librarian archivist can help you that as well. So these are some things. We have old realty records from 3 different realty houses, including most recently at Properties. And this is a card from North Shore Real Estate and from Ann Moreland Real Estate. And people can put little bits and pieces about their home, including who sell them. You know, and these are this is not serious research. This is anecdotal, but people enjoy seeing this. And on the back of the cards, there's often notes about what's going on, what kind of heat, for the buyer, but also in the future research. So we can help you research in your home. It's a small part of the collection, but it's really well used, and you might want to think about what you're looking for before you call us or come in. Right before we started, I was talking to Sarah about, I had reread some short stories. I said, well, I just reread because I was listening to the opera The Woman from Arles as I was going through Virginia programs. And I reread the story, The Woman from Arles, on which the operetta is based. If you haven't heard the operetta, The Woman from Arles, we do have it at the library. It's one of the most charming pieces of music I have ever heard. It's written by Bizet, who of course wrote Carmen, and it was very popular when it came out. It was being played at all the bars, everywhere. If you read Jean Rice, she says, "Oh, I went to the bar and they're playing The Woman from Arles." And the short stories, and what I decided after talking to Sarah, is kind of a depressing short story, but it's very good. But I remembered these stories, which are available on Overdrive in English, and many other stories available on Hoopla and from the library, are fairly easy to read no matter what your level of French. I encourage you both to listen to The Woman from Arles if you want to check it out, or listen to it online. It's super charming and somewhat forgotten music. Or if you want to read a short story. Now, I noticed in Overdrive, this book in translated, described as this is about a bucolic view of Provence 100 or so years ago. Now, yes, it has beautiful descriptions of the countryside, but it also is some pretty cutting social criticism. It talks about the sharecropping system called bectage, which existed until the end of World War II. But it is easy to read if you want to read it in French and you don't have a lot of experience or you want to brush up on your language skills. And it's also available in English. There's some charming stories that are more analytic than they're given credit for in this brief English introduction. And from that, I will pass it on to Sarah.
All right, so first, I have a recommendation from my almost 2-year-old. He has been really enjoying Elephant and Piggy. This, I specifically want to recommend. These are the Elephant and Piggy collections. So this one, they're called Elephant and Piggy Biggie. There are 3 of them now. I think the 3rd one comes out like very soon, but it's 5 books all in one. And I wasn't really sure if he was quite old enough to enjoy these yet, because they're like comic book style, so you have to like understand which character is talking, but I do the voices and that helps. But it was really cold one day and he was like snuggled up next to me on the couch, and I thought, what can I get that'll take a while to read? So I grabbed this, and we ended up reading all 5 books in here back to back. He kept like making me read the next one. So because he's been enjoying this so much, I just ordered this, which is going to be for his 2nd birthday next week, the Frog and Toad Storybook Favorites, which is all 4 Frog and Toad books in one volume. So I'm very excited to share this with him next week when he turns 2. But so I specifically wanted to recommend these treasury type volumes of children's books because you can get a lot of books in one sitting. So those are from Henry. And my recommendations this week, I listened to 3 books, all romances. The first was Beach Read by Emily Henry, which is about a romance novelist who has just lost her father and also just found out that her father had an affair and a secret house. And so she goes to stay in this house to clean it up and get rid of all his stuff. And it turns out that next door is her college nemesis, who is now a famous literary fiction author. So they make a deal to, basically she will teach him how to write romance and he will teach her how to write literary fiction. And whoever sells a book first wins, and the other one has to promote their book. And of course, things happen, they fall in love. They've been in love the whole time and just didn't realize it, but it's adorable, and I really, really liked it. The second book was Natalie Tan's book of Love and Fortune, which is billed as a romance, but I think it was really more of a coming-of-age story with like a romance side plot. But anyway, Natalie Tan has to move back home to San Francisco after her mother dies, decides to take over her grandmother's Chinese restaurant that had been sitting dormant for years, and a neighbor gives her her grandmother's old cookbook, where her grandmother had handwritten all of these recipes, and she has to cook 3 of the recipes to help 3 people in order to like get good luck and be able to succeed in opening her restaurant. And it was really cute, and there are great descriptions of Chinese food, and it made me very, very hungry. And then the third book was Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore, which I was looking back at our show notes, and Sarah Marie actually talked about it in our very first episode of Shelf Isolation. So if she's watching, thank you for the recommendation. It's about the suffragette movement in England and a duke, and the rest sort of follows from that description. But it was also very cute, a bit Pride and Prejudice-y, and it's like dark, brooding male hero. But I found the historical part really interesting. Like, I've read a lot of Victorian era and Regency era romances and never really registered that like the suffragette movement was happening at the same time and all of these other things were happening in politics. So another one that I highly recommend, and also recommend getting recommendations from your coworkers. And on that note, I'm actually reading, I just started Anxious People, which Jacki recommended last week, and really, really enjoying that as well. So yes, get recommendations from other librarians. We also enjoy talking to each other about books. And with that, that's it for today, folks. As always, please remember that we are all here for you. We are available for comments, questions, or concerns that you may have, and you can reach us online through Facebook at facebook.com/HPLibrary, through our Twitter, which is @HPLibrary, or via email at hppla@hplibrary.org. We are also now here in person via reservation. You can learn more about this on our website, which is hplibrary.org. And always check our website before coming to the library. Things are always changing right now. Our music today was Carefree by Kevin MacLeod, and you can find more information about this and the titles we mentioned in our show notes below. Okay, everybody, this is us signing off. Until next time, stay safe.